And then about kind of what I would call the 100 years
To visit us. We've been open for 2 years, and we're going to be celebrating our 2-year anniversary on October the 19th from 1 to 4, and Mr. Oscar Robertson is going to be our keynote speaker, so we're very, very excited about that. We have some flyers at the table, so feel free to take those with you. Don't meet me here, beat me here, and please bring a friend, an enemy, in-law, outlaw. We want to pack the house, so we're really, really excited about having that kind of Hoosier legend to be here to speak to us. Today we are here for Reparations 101, and we're very, very excited about that. And Cobra is also one of our sponsors and our hosts, and Queen Mother Mashariki is here, and Baba Jamal is in the back. And then we also have Jim Mulholland, who is a blogger and a civil rights activist, and he blogs on Notes to My White Self. So we are really, really excited. The next thing we're going to do is have a short video that kind of puts a framework about reparations. So this is twofold. This is for people that don't know anything about reparations and want to learn, and then it's also for people that know about reparations and want to fight to make it a reality. So we're going to start our video now.
Sheikh, welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. On Wednesday, a subcommittee of the House Judiciary held a historic hearing on reparations for slavery, the first of its kind in over a decade. Wednesday's hearing coincided with Juneteenth, a day that commemorates June 19, 1865, when slaves in Galveston, Texas, finally learned that the Emancipation Proclamation had abolished slavery. This year marks the 400th anniversary of the transatlantic slave trade. Lawmakers are considering a bill titled the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. The bill was introduced by Democratic Representative Sheila Jackson Lee of Houston this year, after former Congressmember John Conyers had championed the bill for decades without success. The bill carries the designation H.R. 40, a reference to 40 acres and a mule, one of the nation's first broken promises to newly freed slaves. Ahead of the hearing, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was asked by reporter Eva McKend of Spectrum News whether the government should issue a public apology for slavery.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that. And I don't think we should be trying to figure out how to compensate for it. First of all, it'd be pretty hard to figure out who to compensate. We've had waves of immigrants as well who've come to the country and experienced dramatic discrimination of one kind or another. So no, I don't think reparations are a good idea.
That was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Well, on Wednesday, the award-winning author Ta-Nehisi Coates testified at the historic congressional hearing on reparations and took direct aim at McConnell.
Yesterday, when asked about reparations, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell offered a familiar reply. America should not be held liable for something that happened 150 years ago, since none of us currently alive are responsible. This rebuttal proffers a strange theory of governance, that American accounts are somehow bound by the lifetime of its generations. But well into this century, the United States was still paying out pensions to the heirs of Civil War soldiers. We honor treaties that date back some 200 years, despite no one being alive who signed those treaties. Many of us would love to be taxed for the things we are solely and individually responsible for. But we are American citizens, and thus bound to a collective enterprise that extends beyond our individual and personal reach. It would seem ridiculous to dispute invocations of the founders or the greatest generation, on the basis of a lack of membership in either group. We recognize our lineage as a generational trust, as inheritance. And the real dilemma posed by reparations is just that, a dilemma of inheritance. It is impossible to imagine America without the inheritance of slavery. As historian Ed Baptist has written, enslavement, quote, shaped every crucial aspect of the economy and politics of America, so that by 1836, more than 600 million, or almost half of the economic activity in the United States derived directly or indirectly from the cotton produced by the million-odd slaves. By the time the enslaved were emancipated, they comprised the largest single asset in America. $3 billion in 1860 dollars, more than all the other assets in the country combined. The method of cultivating this asset was neither gentle cajoling nor persuasion, but torture, rape, and child trafficking. Enslavement reigned for 250 years on these shores. When it ended, this country could have extended its hallowed principles, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all regardless of color. But America had other principles in mind. And so for a century after the Civil War, black people were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror, a campaign that extended well into the lifetime of Majority Leader McConnell. It is tempting to divorce this modern campaign of terror, of plunder, from enslavement. But the logic of enslavement, of white supremacy, respects no such borders. And the god of bondage was lustful and begat many heirs. Coup d'etats and convict leasing, vagrancy laws and debt peonage, redlining and racist GI bills, poll taxes and state-sponsored terrorism. We grant that Mr. McConnell was not alive for Appomattox, but he was alive for the electrocution of George Stinney. He was alive for the blinding of Isaac Woodward. He was alive to witness kleptocracy in his native Alabama and a regime premised on electoral theft. Majority Leader McConnell cited civil rights legislation yesterday, as well he should, because he was alive to witness the harassment, jailing, and betrayal of those responsible for that legislation by a government sworn to protect them. He was alive for the redlining of Chicago and the looting of black homeowners of some $4 billion. Victims of that plunder are very much alive today. I am sure they'd love a word with the Majority Leader. What they know, what this committee must know, is that while emancipation deadbolted the door against the bandits of America, Jim Crow wedged the windows wide open. And that is the thing about Senator McConnell's something. It was 150 years ago, and it was right now. The typical black family of this country has 1/10 the wealth of the typical white family. Black women die in childbirth at 4 times the rate of white women. And there is, of course, the shame of this land of the free, boasting the largest prison population on the planet, of which the descendants of the enslaved make up the largest share. The matter of reparations is one of making amends and direct redress, but it is also a question of citizenship. In H.R. 40, this body has a chance to both make good on its 2009 apology for enslavement and reject fair-weather patriotism, to say that a nation is both its credits and its debits, that if Thomas Jefferson matters, so does Sally Hemings, that if D-Day matters, so does Black Wall Street, that if Valley Forge matters, so does Fort Pillow. Because the question really is not whether we will be tied to the somethings of our past, but whether we are courageous enough to be tied to the whole of them. Thank you.
That was award-winning author Ta-Nehisi Coates. He was a lead-off witness before the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. His seminal 2014 essay, The Case for Reparations, helped spur new calls to make amends for slavery. When we come back, he joins us for the rest of the hour.
Greetings to everyone. Thank you so much for your presence, and we hope to have a great exchange through information sharing and question and answers, and it moves us forward in a collective, unified manner. I am Kamal Jawanza. I am the National Co-Chair for Membership and Organizational Development. We'll speak later a little bit about the commissions of NCOBRA, and that'll be one of the more of the functional infrastructural pieces. There's others like information and media. But there are 9 commissions total. Many of them are issue-oriented, developing think tank process, strategies for implementation, finding partners to in fact implement the strategy, testing them, and then getting some accountability factors about how are our people served by those strategies. Such that that's who has to ultimately benefit from what we do, what we say, and how this moves. I want to give a little bit of the structure. NCOBRA's mission is to build a mass-based movement to win reparations. We currently, in this day of conversation, define reparations as full repair. As we shared, we're talking about generations of injury. And so, possibly, we're talking about generations of repair. Yet to be defined, 9, 10, whatever that is, but we'll work that out. The objective now is to get the electoral process, the political process moving such that reparations is in fact a recognized issue with a commission designed for the kind of study that we're talking about. To begin to identify the factors and the elements that would go into that. We are a coalition, not an organization. We're a coalition of individuals. By virtue of the name, it is open to black folks and black organizations. We have, however, what we call allies and supporters, those who recognize that this must be something that together we take care of. And so as allies and supporters, we encourage and welcome again your presence so that we can define and design the strategies moving forward. I don't know if that's 10 minutes or not.
You can talk some more.
Just some points, maybe key points to put into place. NCOBRA, over its years of operation, has defined injury areas, 5 categories of injury. Pretty much during the decades that we've been working, everything that anybody can come up with fits in one of those injury areas. We're not closed. If there's something unique that happens and comes up, that'll be considered, and it could in fact expand and expound upon areas of injury. Because the reparations must in fact give full repair of those injury areas. And so we have defined those. The commissions work primarily in those areas, those who are working around issues. And we want to be able to put together the reparations strategy and package that ultimately the commission can consider. We are a grassroots organization. And so we do have an accountability factor that we hold ourselves responsible to the grassroots. That's why all the conversation, all the strategies, everything is disseminated to the grassroots through our websites, through other kinds of organizational memberships, such that we can get response back. How is this happening? The UN has designed 5 areas of codifying, if you will, the repairs. They talk about, for an example, satisfaction. How do you feel about it? Not so empirically, is it? How are you faring in this land as a result of these strategies being implemented? It talks about secession and guarantee of non-repetition. The battle cry in many organizations that have been focused on this for decades has been free to land. Well, how does that get defined in very practical ways? Let's stop the gentrification. Let's stop the loss of black farmland. Those types of things. That's Kamal speaking now. That's not codified in any strategy or any elements here. That's just me speaking. Those particular kinds of tools, elements, that's a part of what the design will become as we continue forward. This is a beginning here in this area. There are other groups around the country who are having forums of this nature. You have a card that speaks to one of them that, for an example, and we'll talk about a little bit later, they are promoting Reparations Sundays, asking all religious organizations to in fact dedicate a Sunday to this issue, raise resources to support this issue, and share information to educate us all further in depth about the issue. And all of us do need education. You'd be surprised at how much not knowing about our history in some cases. So this is good for all of us. And with that spirit of unity, we encourage you to move forward, listen attentively, ask questions. That's a part of what we have to exchange in dialogue, and formulate the kind of unified force that will get the 535 legislators saying, yes, let's do this. The kind of energy and unity that will move forward that gives us a platform and an infrastructure of operation that makes it happen. Thank you.
My name is Jim Mulholland. I am a longtime Indianapolis resident and in recent years a anti-racism activist and blogger. And first of all, I just want to say what an honor it's been for me to be an ally with NCOBRA and be in support of what they're about and the depth of the thinking that they have put into this issue. And I hope you will look at some of the materials that you're given that just represent this deep and careful thoughtfulness about how we move forward. And I hope you'll appreciate that today as we talk together. I'm often asked why I, as a white man, am passionate about reparations for black people. And that's a fair question. Sadly, it's fairly unusual. The 2014 poll found that 81% of white Americans oppose reparations of any kind, and 31% oppose reparations even if it was 1865. So I want you to think about that. Even in 1865, they would have opposed some kind of reparation. So when you have that deep resistance to be a person who is a white person speaking of reparations makes you fairly unusual. Now, I don't say that to nobilize myself because I need to come to you in full disclosure and say that I came to this accidentally about 10 years ago. At that time, I would have told you I was not racist. I would have told you I was progressive. If you'd asked me about reparations, I might have had to admit I didn't really know what you were talking about. And if you'd explained it to me, I might have not been in support. But about 10 years ago, I met a woman and we got married, and she had previously adopted a little girl from Ethiopia. So 10 years ago, I became a father to a black daughter. And did not anticipate how that would shake up my world. Because when you're a parent, and we all know this, you deeply care about what the environment and world that your child is going to be in. And I was suddenly faced with a whole different perspective on what life was about, and through Ella, began to experience vicariously racism that I didn't even know existed. And experienced it in very insidious, subtle ways that as a white person previously I had not known. Because of that, her mom and I spent a lot of time reading because we wanted to understand parenting a black child. But as we began to do that, we began to realize we didn't understand black culture, we didn't understand black history, we didn't understand anything. And I began to realize how I am a representative of many, many white people who are simply ignorant. Now, by saying that, I don't mean ignorant in the sense of stupid, but I mean ignorant in the sense that we've ignored something for far too long. So, in the process of this whole experience, it became more and more clear to me that there was a debt to be paid. Not an act of charity by white people, but a debt to be paid. And so I began to blog about that, began to talk to friends and family, and discovered very quickly that most of my white peers were not very interested in this conversation. And I began to discover through the blogging, I think, 4 reasons for this. And I want to just say these very quickly, and then we're going to move into some other things. First, I think we have, as white people, a romanticized history of our country. And it's a romanticized history that kind of ignores many, many ugly stories. In fact, we're just not taught them. And so there's much about what we think about enslavement that's basically gone with the wind, not real history. The second thing, I think, is that there is this tendency of white people to say, well, my ancestors didn't enslave anyone, so therefore I'm not responsible. Now, it's a really interesting argument, because if you think about it, they're admitting someone is responsible, but it's not them. But it's this ability to try to distance ourselves from it and say, well, if something bad happened, it's not my fault. The third thing that I think many white people want to say is, well, that's just too long ago. It's just too long ago. You know, how can we possibly fix something that happened that long ago? But I think Ta-Nehisi Coates does a great job of helping us understand what Kamala calls the vestiges of slavery, and I know we'll talk about that more today. And then finally, I think we resist this as white people because it's calling us to something hard. So often white people say, well, this wouldn't be easy. How would you possibly do this? This is complicated. And we do have a tendency to resist something that's hard. And this would be a very hard thing to figure out and to work through. It would require some repentance. It would require some education. And certainly would require reconciliation. So all of these things involved in that repair of the injury that's been done. I think the last thing I want to say, and then we'll move into our next section of our workshop, is, you know, initially I kind of thought of this as something for black people. That reparations were something being done for black people. But the more I've worked on this, the more I've realized is that the diminishment of nearly 20% of the United States population for hundreds of years has done damage to all of us. And I think about the incredible creativity and inspiration that has been lost because we have pushed down one portion of our population and not allowed all of the possibility that was there to flourish. We are a nation diminished by what we've done. And so I think that's so important as a white person to not see reparations as simply repair for what was done in the past, but also see it as the possibility of something new and incredible. That if we can really take the incredible abilities and talent and creativity that are in our black brothers and sisters and allow that to flourish, it's not just they that will benefit, but it's all of us that will benefit from that. So I think that's important as we talk today, especially as white people, not to see this as something for black people, not to simply see this as an act of charity, but to understand it as repairing a debt and restoring our nation to what we dreamed it could have been in that Declaration of Independence. So, at this point, I guess we need to make a decision. We originally were going to break out in 2 groups, so let's do a real quick sense of where we're at. How many of you feel like you're pretty well convinced on reparations and you really need to talk about strategy? If that's the case, just raise your hand. Okay, so about half. And just to double check, how many of you are still really struggling? You're kind of unconvinced and you're here more to kind of explore that. You're more unconvinced. That's pretty well split.
Can I offer?
Okay, go ahead, Tony.
My name is Toby Miller, and I'm here in support of Jim, but I'm an accountability partner. So my job is to identify the breadcrumbs that might have been missed and then help capture them and bring them to our collective attention. We use, and just so you can understand how I enter here and where I back right back out, We use a paradigm of unity, clarity, unity. The idea is we're in the same space trying to learn something. So we're unified, at least in that mission. And then there's a piece of clarification. So I might be here for the right reason, or here's where I am, but here are my questions, and our job is to help clarify or address any misinformation, misconceptions, and then bring us back to unity again so we can find ourselves at least on some common mission. So one of the breadcrumbs I'd like to pick up as we think about moving into a different direction, how many actually believe reparations is happening today? How many believe that reparations is an American value, is something we're doing today?
I mean, as far as culture is concerned, different
Period.
countries-
Is reparations an American value?
It's something we've done before for other people.
Yeah.
It's not for black people.
I personally, I think reparations have already happened.
And let me,
A long time ago.
that's okay. Let me give you an example of modern day reparations that we don't call reparations. It may give us a sense of how this factors in. I bet somebody's in the audience who believes reparations is about money, paying a check. Some people used to think that's all reparations was. I repair you by fixing a debt, and we tend to think of debt in a transactional way. I have a bill, I pay the bill, right? So I'm backing right back out of here, just giving you a sense of how reparations is a very real thing. How many believe that women have been injured in this society? What is it, Title IV? I don't know. Title IX, thank you. Thank you for rescuing me. Women are being repaired for historic damage when they were left out of the systems of government. They were not allowed to vote. There are certain ways that American society organized itself against the way women participated, whether they can or cannot. We're even discussing it in terms of repairing the paradigm around whose body is it. We have a whole bunch of men making decisions about women's bodies. Am I right? So we're still in an experiment. How do we make this relationship whole? And women have an idea. This is what we think needs to happen. But as a society, we are working and identifying and tracking the repair that's being done for women. We tend to think, though, African American injury got solved when Obama was, that women's repair was addressed and solved when they got suffrage. Got the right to vote, everything's good, right? White women. So even in this whole context, we're recognizing there's still misses and fits and pits and moans and struggles. But our community, our society believes in repair. So we have laws that are in place. It's not just we gave women the right to vote, and here's your $50,000 and have a nice life. So it's not just like that. So when we talk about repair, we're looking at historic trauma that impacted the people. And how do we reconcile that debt? And some people, and I'll back out and hand it back over. Some people believe, oh, that was so long ago. So they don't connect two things. Just a few short weeks ago, a young person at Shortridge High School was punched by a police officer and was caught on tape. Okay. The tape that runs in some of our heads was the kid deserved it. Another tape that runs in some of our heads was that is something that goes on all the time and nobody sees it. And if we didn't see it on video, we would have believed the officer. There's a third tape that runs in our heads. If somebody gets shot on the east side, who did it?
Black people.
Did you come up with the profile very quickly?
Yes.
How many of us in our community, if somebody gets caught for embezzlement, have a picture of who that is?
A white person.
I want you to recognize that is historic trauma that we still deal with. Because unless our community says, that kid is our kid, that's my son, not a black kid, that's my kid. Until we get to that point, we recognize that trauma is experienced by a whole group of community, a whole community that some people say that's not mine, that's theirs. Do you understand that? And there's a trauma that's associated with it. That trauma goes back well before that child was born. We're dealing with it today. So God bless the senator when he says that happened so long ago. It doesn't impact us today. I want to bring all that forward. So when we think about repair, do you just repair that kid by giving some money? Restitution to that child is, what does justice look like? That's the kind of question our communities and Cobra is trying to deal with. What does justice look like? What does repair look like? And then how do we make this so that when injury occurs to one of us, it happens to all of us? And to the extent that we can go, that's them, that's on the east side, that's them. The moment we do that, you recognize how far you are away from reparation, the culture of reparation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm backing out. My accountability job here is done. And then we'll kind of look at then how do we prosecute the rest of our conversation.
So I think we go ahead and split up. I think we have enough of a group for the two sessions. We weren't sure. We were going to kind of wait and see if everybody was leaning one way or the other. We'd kind of adjust with that. So Michelle, give directions. The group that's kind of unconvinced, needs to really struggle with the whole reparations question is going to stay here.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Because I think there's value in both groups. And everybody needs the value that each group brings to the party. So is it possible that you could do the first part of giving a primer as to what reparations is, and then move into strategies on how to realize reparations?
That is certainly an option. Okay, well, let's check.
Appreciate that feedback. However, what I want to say for the individuals that are going to be doing this is that they've worked long and hard to kind of separate this, to kind of do a deep dive. And if we have people in the group that are going to stay here that are unconvinced of reparations, that don't have any information about reparations, it's very hard for them to then work on strategies for reparations. But something that we are committed to doing, if there's enough interest, is to having further workshops and or further discussions. And so NCOBRA is a national organization with a local chapter, and we welcome African Americans to be a part of that. And so I think we should probably go, respectfully, Pastor, with breaking it up, and then we can definitely follow up with individuals who are looking for further information after today's work. Did you have a question, sir?
Yes, I had a question. My question is, what is reparations? Is it a cash payment, or is it programs to help people? Because a lot of people in the streets who are for reparations, black folk, they want to check. They're looking for what the Japanese got, what other folk got, and that's where I'm at.
Okay, and so that would be a question that would be answered here, but I'm going to do a quick answer for that. What we're doing as far as HR 40 is concerned is we're studying the situation. Congress studies frogs, air, gnats, soil, the ocean. They study everything. And so we're studying reparations, but then we're also going to give some ideas about how we can repair. So that repair doesn't necessarily have to be a check. It could be programs like what Toby was just mentioning. It could be Title 22, whatever that is. It could be Pell Grants. There could be a number of things. So that has not been determined. But what I would encourage you to think about is, oftentimes wealthy people say, let's not throw money at it. You don't hear impoverished people saying that. And what I would tell you is, I'd like to have the opportunity for someone to throw some money at me and see what I can do with that. That's just my personal side. So what we're going to do, the individuals who still need to get some good background information on reparations, they're going to stay here, and I would ask you to come to the front so you all can hear better. And then the other individuals that want to know action items, we're going to go to the auditorium. So that's either down the steps or down the elevator. That's the second floor, which is the atrium. And we're going to go in the northerly direction. I'll be standing out that door and kind of flagging you in like we're on a runway. And so we'll reconvene in the next 6-7 minutes. That should give us enough time to move forward. Jim?
Okay, sounds good. So if you're unconvinced or you really want to struggle with it, you're not really sure what you think, stay here. If you're pretty convinced and you want strategy, then you're moving with Michelle and Cole.
For going on 5 years, and it has been challenging, but it has been very rewarding, particularly when we look at what is going on today. We have been fighting this struggle for many years, and Cobra has been fighting for 30 years. We just celebrated our 30th convention in Detroit. So it's not anything new. A lot of people maybe are just hearing about things, but our main and pretty much our single focus is to win reparations for our people. And that's what we do, and we need everyone's help. So we're glad that you're here today. We hope we can come up with some strategies. Just a little warning, Kamau loves to talk. So if you want to get your strategies in, you might say, hey, I got something to say. So we can get it in, because we will take this back to our board and to our member organizations as we develop how reparations should look, how this repair should look. We see the need of the repair. We also, I want to point this out, we're not sitting waiting on anything. We have to work in our communities today. We have to help with our mental health issues. We have to help with our educational issues. I don't know how many of you go to school board meetings, go to the State House, all the horrible things that continue to happen to our people. We have to say something about it. During the enslavement period, every white person did not have slaves. Every white person didn't even believe in slavery. But you didn't say a mumbling word. So let's not repeat that. Let's say something. Let's be active about something that's right. A lot has been said already, and Kamau will share some more things with you in terms of the reasons. I stand on the shoulders of Callie House, who right after the enslavement period walked this land, had 300,000 members in her organization.
Could you use the mic, please?
Reparations. Okay. And I stand on this sister's shoulders because I don't know how many of us have thought about what happened after the enslavement period. Oh, they freed the slaves. Oh, they did this, they did that. I saw roots. Horrible things continued to happen to us during that time, even though the so-called Emancipation Proclamation. So Callie House and Dickerson and their organization went to Washington, D.C. and said, we have added up these bales of cotton. We have added up these years that we did this for free. We've added this all up, and this is what you owe us. There were Southern legislators who said, Pam, you give them money, they'll come back down south, we'll build the south. But they didn't do it. They put her in jail for mail fraud. When she got out of jail, she died of cancer. So this is right after the enslavement period. I stand on this sister's shoulders because here we are still today with the same issues. You know, our lives really, when you look at us overall as a people, have not changed much. I say we're the most comfortable slaves in the world because we can't buy a car, we can't buy a house, look at education. They used to kill us for trying to be educated, and now they kill us with loan debt. So he has prepared, I'm going to let him do is preparation. But I did want to thank each and every one of you for coming. There's a lot of places you could have been today. There's a lot going on in Indianapolis. We were just talking about how Indianapolis is getting on any given weekend. There's a zillion things going. So you could have been anywhere. So I really want to thank you for coming and sharing with us. And don't forget, you're going to have to, because he'll keep talking. You'll know the whole history of everything by the time he gets done.
Thanks, Mr. Very quickly, and I'll try to be brief on each aspect. There was a question asked about what is reparations. This is uneasy. And what I'm going to do is read some of the statement that has been developed by the coalition, as opposed to speaking from Kamala's perspective. What is reparations? Reparations is a process of repairing, healing, and restoring people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments or corporations. These groups that have an injury have the right to obtain from government and corporations responsible for the injuries that which they need to repair and heal themselves. In addition to being a demand for justice, it is a principle of international human rights law. As a remedy, it is similar to the remedy for damages in domestic law that holds a person responsible for injury suffered by another when the infliction of the injury violates domestic law. And it goes on with some examples. I think it was started to approach that earlier about who has actually received reparations. In this particular case, in this particular historical venue, it's been as a result of cash payments. And there are many, many groups. There's a story behind that. If we have time, we'll get to it. Because of our process of the lawsuits, we can now explain and understand why court systems and judges say, And there's real, actual, factual aspects of why they're in position to say that. It's not nationality. So, very quickly, the injury areas that I spoke about, they're peoplehood, nationhood, familyhood. That's one collective. The loss, the injury of not having our nationality, our peoplehood, respect as humanity. There's health. There is economic development. And there's detail that will explain all of those and how we define them. There's education, as Mashriki mentioned, that still goes on in many aspects today. No, criminal punishment. Criminal punishment. Youth as a commission. Yes. So those are the kind of categories of injury that we'll talk about that, from our perspective at this point, without further detailed analysis and study, it has to go down categorically where those injuries lie. Again, as I stated earlier, we're open. We're open because we have to go to the people to find out how you're hurting. Just as a doctor says, how you feeling? Where you hurting at? What's it? Sharp pain, dull pain? That's the first stage of analysis and diagnosis. So we must go through that process. With my he said I start talking too much. I apologize. We'll fast forward real quick. In case anybody has to leave before we finish. Strategies and actions, more importantly. What can I do? We were at an event at Butler, and we got that question. That's a valid question. So we give some strategy actions that we'd like everyone to consider. Right now, there's this process of what we call in Cobra Legislative Action 535. 535 legislators, House and Senate. And we want on board saying, yes, let's do the commission, let's do the study, let's create, implement, those healing and repair activities, initiatives, and let's evaluate them as we go forward generation. It's, again, the Code of Legislative Action 535. We have for you some kind of instructions.
We currently have, I believe it's 114 signatures.
116.
160.
So we got a ways to go. Need your assistance. Need your conversation, communication with the legislators that represent your area, saying, get on board. They tend to respond to, if my constituency is asking me to do this. Is this for my, well, this constituency, let's ask them to do it. Let's make it happen. Then we can go further into the definitions of the questions that are asked. What does it mean? What does it look like? Etc. Let's get it done. Let's get the commission done. And we go further with this conversation in our nation. As individuals, or as a group, there are groups around the country similar to what's formed here. And just give you an example of one of them, the National Grassroots Reparations Convening. They subtopic beginning the journey. And their activity right now is what's called Reparations Sundays, where they are appealing to religious groups they may be affiliated with or that they may know, to at least one Sunday have the discussion, have the disclosure, have the information sharing about this issue of reparations in its depth, not in its shallow surface perception, as we're beginning to hear and see in the conversation in the video. And to share that, become active with it, and yes, raise funds for supporting the effort. It's a costly effort to even just put the information out. So Reparations Sunday as an action, if you're affiliated with a religious organization, speak to them. Encourage them to become a part of the movement, part of the mass-based movement. Individual actions. We're seeing signs. I've seen signs of this around the city, in the yards. Be kind. Be positive. Just how we treat each other. That's a good beginning. It goes deeper, but it's a good beginning. Where we begin to treat each other at that internationally defined human level. So the kind of discriminations, the kind of things that we saw in enslavement, yes, I call it vestiges because we saw and see Jim Crow. It's even titled in a book now, The New Jim Crow. So it continues. It doesn't stop, it just changes form, maybe. Entitled in the book, Medical Apartheid. These are books that encourage you to access and go into depth with. So you understand in our various systems and aspects of society how this thing of the need for reparations due to the injury manifests and continues to manifest itself. First being aware, then taking action. That's medical apartheid. Harriet A. Washington. There was a discussion earlier about the gap, the wealth gap, if you will. Much of the efforts are toward getting a check in order to begin to close the wealth gap. We've got to understand how it occurred before we close it. So Dr. Claude Anderson, speaks about black labor, white wealth. Two component elements that go into what has created the wealth gap. Understanding that, then we can very readily move toward devising strategies, step-by-step actions that begin to rectify that. Now, Shariki spoke about Callie House. Mary Frances Berry, author. Callie House, the contraband camps. It was very late in this movement struggle that I was in to understand contraband camps. Their actuality, their reality, where they happen. The Punch Bowl? Devil's Punch Bowl in Natchez, Mississippi. Look it up and read it, please. You can understand what the treatment was. Callie House came out of a contraband camp. This is after so-called emancipation. I'm sorry, yes. My face is black is true. Subtitle Callie House and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations. She took it to D.C. She, Reverend Isaiah Dickerson, the movement, took it to D.C. And my sure he shared what the results of that was. Trying to, in fact, do what's still trying to be done yet today. And then they can get almost comical, but very informative. How white folks got so rich. It's part of the same discussion. It's intentional. We had a young lady come from the Northeast area, speaking with gardeners and farmers, those who are trying to grow food. As we realize an initiative that's evolved in this, what we've been declared in this particular area, food desert. She said to us, "Don't call it a food desert. A desert is a natural phenomenon. Call it food apartheid. Strategic, implemented, expected results and outcomes, etc., etc." So these are the kinds of things, I just want to put it on your thought process to begin to think about how we in fact move toward the strategies for implementation, the individual actions, but also the conversation, collective actions that devise a broader strategy that begin to change the atmosphere of the society. Spoke earlier about free land. Well, we can stop gentrification. Just don't force anybody to move. Facilitate their being able to stay. We can stop loss of black farmland, 30,000 acres last year. And as we get the figures, it'll be the same in previous years to that. Rapid loss of black farmland. That can be halted. I work with farmers from Miles Station area, Princeton, Indiana. They're noted in the National Museum. One of the first and still remaining black farm communities in the state of Indiana. Gentleman goes to get his loan for his tractor, which is a repeated process if you're a farmer. You gotta get new, gotta get repairs, etc. Sure, we'll finance that tractor. I need you to sign over an acre of your land. Now, I understand collateral. That's somewhat unusual. $250,000 tractor tends to stand for itself if the debt's not paid. But you understand what I'm saying? That's just one of the areas. When we talk about health, we just formed a health commission in Detroit as one of our commissions to work through think tank, strategy development, implementation, accountability factor, testing it with those who are injured to see, is there in fact healing going on? Is there in fact repair? It's not going to be immediate. It's not a quick fix at all. It wasn't a quick injury. Just want to do a check to see if we've got any questions, anything coming in right now. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is there a legal strategy, as in filing a suit, in addition to the legislative strategy that you have?
There is a legal strategy commission, and yes, for about 15 to 20 years, filed a series of lawsuits. I'll frame an answer thusly. 1854, 1860, 56, I think it is. Dred Scott decision. Those who aren't familiar, please look it up. And basically, the response was not about the evidence that was presented, not about how it impacts or doesn't impact the law that was on the books. It was about The black man has no rights that a white man has to honor. We move fast forward through Tulsa, Black Wall Street, and a suit that was filed by the Reparations Coordinating Committee, a committee of 21 top lawyers. And the response was, you're right, the evidence was overwhelming. But you have no standing in this court. I go back to Black's Law Dictionary now. What does that mean? It begins us to have to evaluate and examine our status as citizens, little c. Well, that's why I guess I brought the Constitution out too, so we can. It begins to challenge that status. You have no standing in this court. There's nothing you can bring that we have to even hear. And that was at the Supreme Court level. So that's a short answer.
So there's been no recent filing of a suit, and are you familiar, and I'm sure you are, I know you are, with the 1866 Civil Rights Act that says that anybody, specifically people of African descent, are able to go into contracts and get the economic wherewithal that white folks get, and we cannot be denied that because of our race. Has anybody filed for reparations under that law?
That law is a part of
Yes, using that law as the basis for the lawsuit.
Not that I'm aware of. However, as I've done, referred to the legislative commission, the legal commission, legal strategies is what it's called, legal strategies commission. They're actually looking at that as we speak. I've got some answers I can share with you later. But in answer directly, no. Not in terms of a redefined and repositioned lawsuit, using that as a basis, a legal basis. We don't stop. Got to keep it going. That has to happen for those other things. I saw some hands. I don't know who was first. Can you help me? Yes.
With the current Democratic candidates for president, there's a lot of talk of reparations. And so my question is, does Incopa have a position in terms of what they would like to hear those candidates say regarding reparations?
Incopa's position right now is, let's get the commission formed. Let's get the research done.
So essentially it's for someone who, like, you'd like to hear them supporting the HR force.
That's right. HR 40, Senate Bill 1083, as in the document that you have. That's our position. Are we on our own starting to define, designate what we think the elements of reparations might look like? Yes. But again, our process is slow because we hold accountability, ourselves accountable to our people, to the grassroots people. So our process is not just to think tank and brainstorm. We've got experts and scholars who are doing that. We've got to put it out to the people and get a response as to if this is in fact a strategy that we should and could pursue. So it's in process, but not definitive. That's why I said earlier, some people just say, it's just a political ploy to get elected. There's no depth. Because there's no real understanding yet how serious the injury is. We talked earlier about generational psychological trauma. It's real. You see it in areas all over the place, now being applied as a scientific notation around that particular area of psychological, social health trauma.
So, what if, or should I say when, we are doing reparations and you're like, well, it's for those who are
really find answers to our heritage?
Good question. I was asked that question just the other day, in fact. First of all, we have to be very fundamentally involved in that definition of who. Very much involved. In fact, who else can tell us who, other than ourselves? We must tell others who. That's a difficult and a complex question. We have begun, as in COBRA, from the perspective of, have you been injured? Have you suffered discrimination? Are you of the hue of descendant of African or Caribbean, if it's immigration, or Diablo, for example? 41 times. Because they had a phone in his hand. Those symptoms of the societal reality must be, in fact, addressed and dealt with, because our children suffer the same thing. You okay? I'm sorry, maybe this hand was next.
Actually, I kind of thought about something she said, then let him go and then I'm going to think about what I was going to say.
No problem.
When we're talking about strategies, and I'm looking at the list here, it says in 1988, U.S. apology to Japan and the Japanese Americans with $1.25 billion in reparations. In 2009, U.S. issues an apology for slavery. How could they come up with a strategy for the $1.25 billion for the Japanese Americans and say that it's unacceptable?
That's a good question.
The Senate version of the apology, the last statement that was there,
I ain't giving them no money.
and this is not my words, I'm paraphrasing, this does not mean reparations. This does not mean anything unique to reparations. It's just an apology.
So it's an institutionalized thing here. Because if you read this timeline, when laws are written, we can come together all we want. But the people that are enforcing the laws are the ones that have to be changed. And quite frankly, when Mitch McConnell said what he said, I didn't see one African American, anybody of any color standing there with him. Yes. So in order for me to get my mind, because being a minister, you guys know that, but as a minister, I have to look at things holistically. I have to look at cultures as God sees them, from a soul perspective. So when I look at that picture of Mitch McConnell, how am I supposed to feel about that when he's not even thinking about this, or we're in an institution where the people that are enforcing these happen to look like Mitch McConnell? So how do I reconcile with that? Now, I have the answer to that, but the question is, all of us getting together is a great deal. But until that changes, that's where the strategy, in my opinion, needs to start. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be radical or anything like that. I'm just trying to figure it out.
Yes, yes. Great perspective, and appreciate the contribution. Please understand that in COBRA and its members, also, along with the strategies of the commissions and trying to change the society through law, etc., are about changing the mindset. First of all, amongst us. First of all, how we change then moves the lever about how everything else changes. As we unify, it moves that lever. We're asking for the support. We're asking for the allies. Purpose of this gathering. Rest assured, our loot to continue. The struggle continues. And so we're about changing our psychology, recognizing our social trauma, and begin to address it in our organizational structures, in our religious structures, in all of our structures that constitute what makes us as a whole unit. And moving with that, welcome the support, understand, in many cases needing that support. Not just for ourselves, but for those who ally and support with us, as was stated and recognized earlier. This nation can wear that t-shirt. America Must Atone is one of them that we have. It's a part of that healing process. But I hear your question, and at this point, and we can dialogue further, but at this point, we'll talk about our strengthening our unification to be a force to move the lever, if you will.
And final thing, I'm sorry. Part of the reason why it's been a struggle with the institutionalization of this is that there were laws in place where even when white people wanted to sell their homes or property to African Americans, they simply weren't allowed to do it. So it's kind of a catch-22 if you stop and think about it. And it's easy for people to walk around, and even if they benefit from the law ignorantly, I mean, it's written. So they really, their hands are kind of tied. And that's the last I'll say, because I'm not trying to dominate it.
I'm a practitioner in the industry of redlining, so we'll care.
How can we expect to get the Congress to do some sort of like scientific research as far as the hurt or the damage done to the black community, when it's hard for us to get them to do simple researches on how police affect us in our black communities and how, you know what I'm saying, judge, jury, all these things, like get any type of documentation on these things. How do we get them to actually go through these things when they benefit from not doing this? How do we get people who are in a position of power? You know, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna do the research and I'm gonna do all this for your benefit so that I gotta give you something. Like, how do we, you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get past that barrier?
Let me ask you a question. Who identifies the commission members? And I'll answer, I'll give time for thought, but got an answer. Because we must be a part of every element of the process. We've got people who are scholars. We've got people who are studying this. They need to be at the table. The picture of McConnell and who was around him tells a story. We must have a seat at the table. We go to the table negotiating without anything to negotiate with. And wonder why we come out with nothing. So this is part of the paradigm change that must occur. You know, and it's no problem having anybody else at the table. We appreciate allies and supporters. But we must be part of the central part of the conversation. The definitions, the identification of injury, the solutions and repair that must take place. The long-termness of it. We've heard some conversations that say, okay, get a check, that's it, we do with this. That's actually part of some conversations that come on. It's going to take a little longer than that. It's going to be a little deeper than that. We got children who are traumatized right now. Going to school, I work in the schools. Teachers quitting. Kindergartens and first graders used to come, they happy, they children, they joyous. Now they come in angry, mad, upset. 5 and 6 years old. One could say that's familial and social and community, but I think somebody talked about institutionalization. It's also systemically institutionalized. And it's being applied in other areas of health, trauma situations. Military always had it, still got it. But we got a military situation out here on the streets.
But the peace work. But essentially that's what they did, and this became an extremely powerful technique that they shared across from work camp to work camp, and it's pretty clear that the way they increased the production was not by technology, but by forcing enslaved people to produce higher and higher levels of cotton production. So again, when we think about what was happening in the 1850s and 60s, it's really important to recognize that what we're talking about is a brutal system for economic gain that's racialized enslavement and has justified it through the Bible and other ways by deciding that black people are inferior and therefore somehow deserve it. You know, this is just this their lot in life.
And it gets finally codified. Talk about 1860s. It gets codified in the Dred Scott case, 1857, when the highest court in the land says these group of people have no rights that we're inclined to respect. It locks it in as property, even though we're still a few years before the Civil War. The highest court in the land said it is decided law. These are no longer human beings. They are a machine, because that machine needed to produce that high yield of production. And if you mistreat a machine, a human, there's repercussions. But if you mistreat a machine, you just fix a bolt, fix a nut, and you keep on going. So that, when the highest court in the land, 1857, codified it, made it, that's established law.
That's interesting. Elaborate on what you mean that it codified.
When all appeals are exhausted, the Supreme Court has said, this is it. That's it. It becomes law. It becomes, and since we are a nation of what? Laws. Then that establishes that this group of these people are no longer human beings.
It declared that the owner had property rights over the individual, right?
True, but it established that individual no longer as an individual, as a chair.
The owner owned them, had the right over them, and they had no recourse.
Complete.
That's what that case
Complete.
was. Right.
Yes. So that chair, those people, had no rights that society ever had to acknowledge. A chair can't bring suit.
Right.
A human being couldn't bring suit. So it was the piece where America finally decided, look, we're going to settle this. That is no longer a human being.
Okay, because that reminds me, according to animal cruelty laws, only cats and dogs are considered, they're covered under that. But cows, pigs, and chickens, they're considered industrial animals. They can be mistreated and abused. Otherwise, all these confined animal feeding operations would go out of business, because they'd have to go by those animal cruelty laws. But cows and pigs, they're just as sensitive and intelligent as a dog or a cat.
Good point.
Right? So remember that.
That's an important piece.
So again, we want you to get this context, because again, part of the problem, I think, for some of us is, and this is getting to the question of injury. Was there injury? Is I think so often we've had this romanticized vision of what it was like in the South. And you hear that now. I mean, Roy Moore was running for the Senate, said, he looked back fondly on those days. Well, that's because, partially, he didn't understand those days. He's ignorant about what that was really like. So again, that's a big piece. Now, what happens in 1857, Dred Scott, 1859, John Brown? How many of you were taught about John Brown in school? Tell me what you know about John Brown.
It was just my first recollection of John Brown was the song we were taught.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think most of us know that. So what else do you know about John Brown?
He was expecting to lead a slave revolt, and Robert E. Lee and the Federal Army killed him, or captured him, and killed some of his followers and armies there.
Sons.
Anything else you know about John Brown? Was he respected? Was he sane? Was he crazy? Any sense of that?
Very well respected.
Say that again?
Very well respected.
Yeah, here's the interesting thing. In his day, John Brown was extremely well respected. Now, I just point that out is when I was taught it, I was taught he was crazy. And isn't that interesting? Well, I can remember when I was taught John Brown in high school, and they showed you the picture that's in Kansas of him with the hair blowing back and the gun, and we were taught that John Brown was crazy. Well, I've since read a lot about John Brown and discovered that at this time, he was one of the more highly respected orators and thinkers in our country. And he thought that it was going to take violent revolution to change it. And he was trying to do that in 1859. Now, it's also really interesting to know when he was executed for many enslaved people, it was a great tragedy because they had had such hopes. You know, here finally was a white person who was willing to put their life on the line, and then, you know, the government hanged them. You know, but we need to keep that in context. That in some ways he's the first white ally, somebody who's really willing to put it out there. And how the history I was taught kind of diminished him, made him out to be crazy. That, you know, a traitor, maybe even a traitor. So the Civil War comes, Emancipation Proclamation. That we're not going to cover that. You all know that. So, but I want to ask you, 1865. How has the game changed? 1865, Emancipation Proclamation. So we're playing the game of Monopoly now. What's the African American have that they didn't have before?
A window and a sliver.
Say that, a window and
a window and a sliver.
A sliver, a sliver. Okay, I like that. Do they have any money?
A sliver of it, yes.
The interesting thing is, do you know the first time reparations were actually discussed? It was in the presidential election of 1864. It was debated. Do you know what the reparations were for? The people who owned the slaves. It was the discussion about how much money should be given to them in a check.
For the loss of their property.
For the loss of their property. Okay? 40 acres and a mule, which you hear about, never happened. Never happened. It was proposed, but it never happened. Okay? So, again, if we're thinking about the game, okay, you got freedom. I guess you can move around the board. But if you land on any place where you're going to have to pay rent, what's your problem?
No money.
You got no money. Okay? And we'll get to this in a little bit, fairly soon the rules are going to change again. So you get to move a little bit at first. And if you want to read some interesting stuff, the Reconstruction, there was about 10 years period from 1865 to about 1975, or 1875, where there were black legislators, there were senators, black House of Representatives, South Carolina, Mississippi, Georgia had black legislators, black governor. So you had this moment where there was this opportunity for there to be repair. It was largely driven by the federal government, Freedmen's Bureau, Ulysses S. Grant, doing things to try to protect the vote. And as we all know, that's when a group rises that we all know about, which is the Ku Klux Klan. And it is started in direct response to this Reconstruction, this sudden moment when formerly enslaved people are taking power. One of the things that happened in all of these states in the South, there was no public education. It was during the Reconstruction that most of those states started public education, and it was public education primarily so that black men, women, and children could learn to read, because it had been against the law for them to learn to read. So there's this huge influx of black people. It's when the first black colleges get established in the South. So there's this moment of about 10 years where there's this rich possibility in the South of there really being a reconciled nation.
We bring that forward to questions of today. What was the reaction, or why was KKK and other groups starting to say, wait, there's a problem? Because it was perceived as a redistribution of wealth. If we go back, it smelled like the brand of socialism. So that it's changed in its title, but that's how are people reacting? You're now taking this was part of our wealth, taking property and trying to redistribute it among people who were previously known as people, right? So that kind of argument is transposed through the century. And we find the conversation, while it's nuanced now, that kind of conversation, redistribution of wealth, as part of a bookmark that is showing up today. We don't see it in racial terms, but it's one of those insidious little things that current continues to flow in our national discourse. I just want to make sure I bring that bookmark for you.
And let's be clear about that. Who produces a huge amount of this wealth? that we're talking about redistributing. Who produced it? Black enslaved people. Not all of it. I'm not saying that white people didn't work and do things too, but we know that a huge amount of this was created, and none of it comes back here. And so we really have more money continuing to be put in the white hands, and very little money. I don't want to say a sliver, maybe coming over here. The other thing is, right around this time after the Civil War, there's the Homestead Act. You familiar with that? Well, the Homestead Act was an interesting thing. It was a nice thing because it distributed all this land out in the West to people. Unfortunately, a lot of it was left up to different states to decide how that would happen. So, in the southern states, they just designed it so black people couldn't avail themselves of it. So the land that could have, if you think about it, there was a lot of land that in 1870s could have been distributed to black families. They could have gone out and did farms in Kansas and Nebraska and all those places where white people are going to move en masse, but they're eliminated from that. So again, all this land that could have gone over here ends up going back to the same people that had it in the beginning.
Can you say something about the 1866 Civil Rights Act?
Well, thank you. 1866. So we have it's the Republicans there. We have black representatives in the Congress, and it's a very radical Civil Rights Act that is basically what gives us the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which basically establish voting. It makes enslavement illegal unless
you're convicted of a crime.
You're convicted of a crime, which becomes really important for what we're going to talk about next. Thank you.
But 1866 said that anybody besides white people, have the right to go into contracts and make money like anybody else, like white folks do.
Right.
And then that law is still on the books today. Yeah. And there's a lawsuit at the Supreme Court that Byron Allen is waging against Comcast and Charter because they will not carry his programming. And I'm wondering, if you're talking about reparations, if a lawsuit could be filed for reparations under the auspices of the 1866 Civil Rights Act.
Very interesting, very interesting.
What do you think?
I think I'll leave that to the other group to talk about. No, I've got a lot more I want to get to, so I would love to talk about that, but that will get me sidetracked.
Also, wasn't Liberia in Africa, wasn't that founded to send all the black slaves back to Africa?
Yeah, that was actually happened in the 1830s.
Oh, 1830s.
Yeah, it was earlier. But, again, think about this. When you are born in a place, and your children are born there, and your grandparents are buried there, the idea of suddenly, I'm going to go back to Africa. Enslaved people said, we're Americans. This is our country. So what, again, happens, and this is really important to understand, that the game, in the Emancipation Proclamation, there was for the moment, and through the Civil Rights Act, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, there is a moment where it looks like the game is going to be fair. Even though we're not given any money, at least the rules are going to be fair. But they're not. Quickly what happens is, especially in the South, but it'll be in the North as well, but initially in the South, the rules are rigged again. One of the biggest ones is a vagrancy law. And a vagrancy law basically says that if you're just don't have anything reason for what you're doing, we can arrest you. Okay? Now, if you also have a law in the 13th Amendment that says you can't be enslaved unless you're incarcerated.
Convicted of a crime.
What do you think is going to happen?
A lot of people
make criminals.
Yeah. In fact, there are some arguments that oddly, and this is a really odd thing to think about, that in some ways, black people actually had more protections in 1860 than they did in 1880. Just think about this. At least you belong to a white person. Now, I know that sounds terrible to say, but think about this. Think about this, what this means. If somebody comes and does something to me, the person who owns me and considers me property is going to be upset. They're going to protect their property. In 1880, the way it worked is you're suddenly, you got no one to protect you. When you violate the law and they take you to prison, there is nobody to advocate for you. So when I say that, I don't say that, I say that kind of ironically. But that's really what happens. So in some ways, the kind of enslavement that happens in 1880 will in some ways be even more brutal than what was happening in 1860. And a good example of this is U.S. Steel in Birmingham, Alabama, who set the news out across the South, send us your young men. So they would pay a certain amount to all these county sheriffs for them to supply workers, and they bring them, and just like before, it's industrial slavery. The mortality rate at those U.S. steel plants was 50% a year. So think about this. You get arrested for vagrancy. You can't pay the fine, so the county sends you to Birmingham to work in the steel plant, or the steel mines, coal mines, and 50% of you who go there are all going to be African American. You're going to die in the first year.
But isn't that the way it's still happening today?
Yeah, in some ways. Some of you have seen the documentary 13th, and it documents how the incarceration system continues to do some of those things. But I just give you that sense that the rules get rigged real quick again. Suddenly there's all these laws that keep you from voting. There's all these laws that you have to have, they pass laws all through the South. You have to have permission from your employer to change jobs if you're black. Later on, when people start the Great Migration to the North, they make laws about who can get on the trains or not. You know? So there's all these things that continue to rig the system, which is why I think Ta-Nehisi Coates is trying to say to McConnell, it would be nice if in 1865 the rules had been fixed and everything had been made right, but that's not what happened. It's not what happened. Go ahead.
Actually, I kind of feel that as a leading dog and we not become Congress as well. It seems here we haven't give everything back to the profession that they want to do. Yeah. So while Congress is out during this period, he was actually able to do what he wanted to do. Maybe do so without kind of feel all the laws that the way they want to work.
Yeah. I'd highly recommend some of us reading about Reconstruction. I didn't know anything about it. I never taught anything about Reconstruction in high school. It wasn't until I was 50 years old that I read anything about Reconstruction. And it is a fascinating look at what could have been, what was possible and what was lost. And then about kind of what I would call the 100 years of white terrorism. And that's really what it is. One of the things I was shocked about is between, and I want to make sure I get these figures right, between 1865 and 1945, there was one lynching every week. And I think we don't understand what lynchings were. Lynchings were not, they hang you by the tree. I'm going to be brutal about what this is right now. Lynching is, we dismember your body parts, we burn you, we shoot you, or multiple persons shoot you, we stone you, and then in the end we maybe hang you, and then we take you down and we drag you through the town, and then we leave your body in the African American part of the community.
This still happens today?
All public.
This happened today.
All public. Not only public, but it's in the newspapers that night, the pictures of it, the descriptions of it. There's postcards made of it. White families come and have a picnic at it.
And you was the Nick they picked.
Yeah. And in almost every situation, I shouldn't say that, in most situations, there probably was no crime. Now, I'm not saying it ever. There were probably some circumstances where there was crime, but in a vast majority of the situations, there was no crime, other than maybe challenging the status quo in some way. We know that a lot of the lynchings happened to people who were economically successful. If you were economically successful, you get targeted and there'd be a lynching. Now, think about that. So what does a lynching every week in the United States, which is going to be in the newspapers and all that, what does it serve in what you're communicating to your black population?
Status quo.
Status quo.
It normalizes.
Intimidation. Okay.
Well, also too, what I've come to read and research was that, yeah, the South was in chaos, so there was a lot of street justice. So, there's that iconic photo where you see, this black guy hanging and all these white people are grinning and what have you. And I think that's maybe in the 1920s, I'm not sure. But,
No, it happens today.
but the thing, though, too, is what's left out in the history books is that there was white people, there was white guys that were hanged also. Okay, and that just happened to be a black dude that got hung. Okay, but
Happened? That's an interesting word.
And the point here, and you're right? It doesn't dismiss the normalization that this group of people, by virtue of who and what they are, is normalized. Now, if the white guy gets lynched, everybody's thinking he must have done something crazy.
He was helping a black guy.
But by virtue of the societal normalization of it, all right, it's the same kind of narrative that people listen to without recognizing that they're listening to.
well, also, too, keep this in mind. Anytime you see like two black people together, you think, oh, they like each other. You think automatically, oh, two black people, oh, they must like each other because they're black. Or you might think, oh, two white people, they like each other because they're white. That's not true. Most, very few white people, am I best friends with, okay? And there are some of my friends are black, okay? But you can probably say the same thing too. Most black people, you're not, in simpatico with them, whatever. There's some animosity that you have with some fellow black people, right? So, keep that in mind. White people, they were out to target white people too. They had enemies that were white. It wasn't just a white on black on white thing.
And that's certainly true. However, one of the things that they've done, the lynching project's done a lot of research, and a lot of the white lynchings were actually white people who were supportive of black.
That's right.
So there's a lot of connection. Not always. I'm sure we can find instances where a white person was lynched and it had nothing to do with that. But I think you're going to find in a lot of those circumstances, the white person was sympathetic or supportive of a black person in the situation, and then became their target.
And we have to keep it going a little bit, but there are things called challenges. There are actual laws on the books called black codes.
Yeah.
There were no laws on the books for white codes, except to the extent that it made it illegal for white people to do certain things with black people. So we have to kind of recognize what the reaction from government was such to make it so it was illegal for black people to play checkers publicly in some places.
Let's go on.
So we just keep that in mind.
We got 10 minutes. We're not going to make it. But I do want to get a couple more highlights before we finish. When I do this workshop, I often do it in 2 hours. So we were trying to do it in 90 minutes, and we've had a good conversation, and I appreciate that. But let me kind of speed through 2 or 3 things here. A couple things about the terrorism. It wasn't just the terrorism of lynching. Some of us know about the race riots in Tulsa. And let me just say this. Until the 1960s, race riots were always white people attacking black people. Okay? That term is exactly what it means. It's not until the 60s and 70s that it gets used as black on black kind of thing or black on white. Before that, race riot was always the other way around. Okay? So what we have in Tulsa is, at this point, the Wall Street, the Black Wall Street is what it's called. It's an extremely affluent black community. And in 1921, essentially the government of Tulsa, it was not just a mob, it was a very intentional thing, basically burns down the black community, their businesses. Let me give you the figures exactly, 800 people of color were hospitalized, 6,000 were arrested for resisting arrest, and 40 were murdered at the very least. It's also the only instance of aerial bombing on American soil until Pearl Harbor, that the sheriff down there actually flew planes over and dropped incendiaries on the community to burn them. So, and essentially what happens is and this happens again and again in the United States, you push out all of the African Americans out of a successful community, and then white people come in and take over. This happened right here in Indianapolis. I mean, essentially, our interstate systems, our universities, and our hospitals are built on the former sites of middle-class black communities. Yeah. We didn't bomb them, but we figured out other ways to get rid of them. So, yeah. Another good example is Rosewood. I'm not going to go into all the details. It's this town in Florida where essentially the white people came in and just wiped out this black community. This one is interesting because in 2015, the state of Florida paid reparations to the surviving members, who are there very few, they were in their 80s and 90s, of that massacre. But essentially, it's another example of terror. Now, again, these things get put on the newspapers, okay? They are publicized nationally. And the inference always is that there's nothing really wrong with this, okay? That this is just what these black people and communities deserve, okay? So again, think about what that does in terms
What white folks do.
the economic and societal enslavement and intimidation of a large part of our population. So, okay, so sometimes people say, well, but what was the government doing? So I want to cover this as our last thing, and then we'll have to quit. Social Security came in 1930. Unfortunately, Social Security was designed so that most African Americans could not use it. Correct. So 65% of blacks were excluded from Social Security. Now, were whites excluded? There were some categories, but only 27% of white people got excluded initially.
Can either of you give some verbal illustrations of how that exclusion was codified, that blocked them out?
Well, the most obvious way it was you found certain categories of workers, and you said those workers will not qualify for Social Security.
I get that. That's like how agricultural workers historically have been prevented from having protections in labor law. I get that. But other than the idea that it was done, what is a specific, like Dred Scott, was there a,
The book I recommend is The Color of Law, and he goes very carefully through all of that. And I recommend that you go look at that, and he can give you exactly how it was codified.
Yeah, the laws became very explicit, and then they became nuanced. So, for example, we have, even in Indianapolis, community covenants that made it illegal. In Indiana, we had sundown laws, which, as a matter of fact, the legacy I was told when I moved to Indianapolis, don't drive in Martinsville after 90. So now I moved here in 90, but I was told, even though that law didn't, quote, exist anymore, the culture, the inertia of that memory continued in the narrative of people who said, don't go there after night. So when we talk about, does it happen locally? Is this something that currently exists? It's still providing injury in our communities. And that's something, even though we don't see it all the time in law, redlining was evidence. It was actually documented. You can go look at what happened in Baltimore, especially because the United States government said it was okay to exclude black people from certain developments. It was all right for black people not to get the GI Bill.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there.
I want to talk about that sundown law real quick. That reminds me, because I'm renovating the house near downtown, and I was out there last night around 9 o'clock. And I'm not saying the sundown laws were good, but as I was driving away, there was all these black dudes. Yeah, and I'd feel the same way if there's a bunch of white dudes. Okay, but they were all hanging out on the street. It's like, what are they doing out at night? It was just really menacing, and I don't know. I can kind of see that where they'd have sundown laws.
Yeah, but I want you to think about it.
Help me, son. Help me.
Laws
Help
still
me.
racialized.
God
Sundown laws
bless.
are saying black people can't be in this town after sundown, not white people. So if you had a neighborhood in Indianapolis that said white people, you're not allowed in this side of town at this time, that would be one thing. All right, and there are communities right here in Indianapolis that say, don't be here, right off the river.
White River?
Yeah, what's the name of it?
Huh?
Thank you.
Oh, no, he talking about,
You know what I'm talking about.
yeah, Ravenswood. Yeah,
There's a
Ravenswood.
community just recently
Right.
that was saying black people were not allowed
That's
by
right.
virtue of cultural covenant.
That's right.
Not in terms of written covenant, cultural covenant. So these are very real, very present injury that still goes on right here in Indianapolis. I'm sorry.
No, I want to get to the GI Bill because this is really so important to talk a bit about this. Most economists believe that the GI Bill had more to do with creating middle-class wealth in the United States than anything our country ever did. It was an intentional, targeted effort for a specific group of people to lift them up. It involved free education, low housing loans, low business loans, special deferments for employment. Employers receive money for hiring the veterans. It's considered one of the most successful targeting of a group that's ever been done in the United States. It creates incredible wealth. Okay? So first of all, I want you to understand what it was. It was reparations. It was to repair the damage that these people had experienced in World War II as our veterans in the war. It was reparations to them. Okay?
It was white affirmative action.
Yeah, it is white reparations, and that's the next thing, because it was designed intentionally, the color of law will show you this, intentionally to exclude black veterans. Okay? So, for instance, just to give you an example, there were housing loans, 67,000 housing loans given to veterans in the first 4 years after World War II. 100 of those went to black families. 100. So you begin to see how we have this vast program our government creates to only benefit, and we're not talking about 1865, we're talking about 1950, okay? To benefit one group at the exclusion of the other. The reason I think it's really important, think about the GI Bill. When someone says to you, well, reparations wouldn't help, the GI Bill is clear evidence that a targeted economic program can lift a huge group of people up and create wealth.
The Marshall Plan was reparations.
Right. Same thing. So targeted and careful programs can create incredible wealth. There's been some studies that have looked both at the Social Security and at the GI Bill, and what would have happened in terms of wealth for African Americans if they had been available, and the low estimate is that it would generate another $200 billion of wealth in black families today, if they had just been allowed to be part of those programs. Because it's generational. You give money to people, they pass it on to the next generation, they accumulate. So we begin to see that the injury is exponential. It's not just about a past injury, it's how that injury gets perpetuated and continued generationally. So we are right at 4 o'clock. So what I want to come back to as we close, and I'm not going to answer these for you, but I want to draw you back to these to think about these reparational questions. The first one is, was there injury? Yeah. When we look back, was there injury? And I think anyone who said, no, there's no injury, I don't know what they're, where they're at. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what they're thinking either. Well, I think there was an injury, but there's been reparations, and I'll explain why. Or you want me to explain real quick why?
Have there been some things done? Yes.
Well, no, here's why I say it is, because, okay, now what if there wasn't the slave trade? What if black people weren't brought over from Africa? All you black people here, you'd be in Africa right now, working for a dollar a day, working in a,
And happy. Because I would not want to come over here and mess with a person like you. And happy. And happy. That's pitiful. You know, no, I'm happy to come over here to be with white folks. Bug that. Bug that. He's a racist. He needs to be stopped.
So yeah,
He's pitiful.
be grateful that you're living in America.
Screw that. Screw that. Screw that.
But I want you to understand.
Yeah, screw that. Nobody happy that you
be around a person like you. Screw that.
Let's listen to this, though. Let's listen to this. Hold on.
There's no need for that.
Yeah, it is.
Let's listen.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it
Brother
is.
Minister.
They got to know more than, look, I'll stop a hole in his ass.
Brother Minister.
Don't touch me.
One of the things we have to do. One of the things we have to do here, and this allows us to.
Yeah, he got to know that everybody ain't broke.
One of the things we have to do is recognize.
Yeah, everybody ain't broke.
This injury, though, is an experience.
Yeah, everybody ain't broke, man.
While we hear what you're saying, I want you to recognize that even just the reaction here is part of the manifestation of all of this injury. This is the way it's supposed to be. And people are still experiencing the remnants of that in different ways, different perspectives. And this isn't just to beat up on white folks, but it's to clarify the fact that the injury imposed by systems and cultures still is experienced today. And people feel it. It's not just something we think. It's something people feel and experience. All right, and validating that experience.
And we'll act on.
Yeah, and that goes.
And we'll act on.
That's assault when you threaten somebody.
Man, look, you ain't got the half of it. You ain't got the half of it. Yeah, you ain't got the half of it.
Well, and this goes to the.
Why you sitting over there grinning? I ain't grinning.
You know,
Yeah.
The second question: what was the scope?
You better understand.
The injury, and I think you're right.
I know I'm right.
Yeah, you're
Yeah, I know I'm right.
You're feeling that injury right
Yeah,
now.
I know I'm right. And I'll fight. Yeah, I know I'm right.
I hear you.
Yeah, I'll fight.
And
Yeah.
the injury.
Yeah, I'll fight.
There's some other things in contemporary. The injury still being felt right here in our city.
Right now.
For example, African American owned businesses have to do things now just to get contracts within our city that white businesses don't have to. So my business, I have to prove that I own my business by 51% in order to qualify for a contract. The city has a law that says African American businesses are supposed to get a certain number of contracts.
At least 15%.
But we're less than half of that. So the hoops that I have to jump through as a black business person, no other group has to do that. It's codified in law.
Wasn't that like what they call that sunsetted or something like that? Now there's a Napoleonic law where if I don't know, it's different from sovereign law or whatever, where if a law is like really old, then it's automatically just great.
No, let me help you. That's on the books right now.
Right.
Right now. If I want to qualify for a contract with a city, I have to go and certify that my business is a legitimate minority-owned business.
Right, but that's if you're a minority vendor, right?
Hear me.
You get special
No
contract.
other group has to do that. White people don't have to do that.
No.
But like I know, like in the government, when they contract out stuff, services or goods or whatever, they go to a minority vendor and then they go through them first. They give them treatment or I don't know, but you have to qualify to be a minority vendor.
Let me put
Exactly.
Right.
The cost of doing business,
But
we got to get out of Jim's way. Let him finish. The cost of doing business, though, for black people is higher because we have to do that certification. So that's just right here. So it's bringing it full circle so that we can see that injury is still trying to be repaired, but even in some of the repair, it creates even more injury. So we just want to acknowledge and bring forth what you're saying, but hear what Jim is also saying is that injury, and it's important, black people, I experience that injury, right? White folks don't always experience that injury. So you have a white man saying, I want to make sure other white people and even black people see that this injury is perpetuated.
And deep.
I got you the parking meter.
I bet you do.
I appreciate you and your comments.
Yeah, it is a cool history lesson. I didn't know a lot of stuff.
And again, thank you for saying that. I think that a lot of this is for a lot of us who are white, and probably for many who are black, part of it is our school system has not taught us any of this. You know? So some of this, when I use the term ignorance, it doesn't mean you're not smart. It means you've not been given the information.
They don't want a lot of people to get the exposure. So if they can hide it, they will.
I think that's true. I think some of it is very intentional. You know,
They don't want you to know about it.
Right, yeah.
They didn't want people to know about Haiti in 1791.
I think it's important to know who is American, right? Because like you can come over here and immerse in the whiteness and just be considered white. But we were actually here over a century before 1776. Right?
Yeah, very good point.
So you got
But America didn't exist.
the Dodge Revolutionary War.
Right.
The Irish came later, the Italians came later, the Polacks came later. You just get to immerse in the whiteness and receive those benefits from America. And you hear that speaking with the rhetoric today,
right.
Them saying, what if we never came and you can go back? Right. We are Americans, right? You can't separate
We became Americans.
blacks from America. We was here before America. Our bodies were the actual value that built America. We were worth more than all the railroads, all the textile, all the land in 1860. This is before you got your 3 years in and became a farm. We are American. Our bodies were the value that built America. Somehow, our melanated skin color kind of displaces us as other, as African, or something else.
Thank you. That's really eloquent. Thank you. So let me just thank you all for coming out today. You know, this is a difficult conversation, and I'm glad he was here today because he does represent a lot of people I interact on Facebook with and have conversations, and people in my own family. So, you know, I think if you are black, what I want to say to you is keep pushing, keep fighting, keep demanding the rights that belong to you. And if you're white, I really call on you to move toward understanding first, and then to be an ally. How to support what are the just demands of people who created the incredible wealth that all of us are benefiting from.
And I like to say that the biggest problem is so many of us are not educated, and I think that now that we hear and know, it behooves us to be a voice and to educate others, because as long as you do not speak up and educate others, this will continue to be the situation. So we all have to educate our families and our friends, or at least speak to the information that we have within us.
Which is one, and I want to give Jim a shout out here. It's one of the things begins the reparation is that some of us, I want to find out how many have seen or learned that reparations perhaps is a legitimate now issue to discuss in our community. I haven't heard this presentation.
It's expanded my belief.
And I want to thank Jim for taking on this space and this effort to begin the education process. The next steps are important. That part of the reparations is even if you're not convinced, but you want to know more, is to follow back up with Jim and say, tell me more, or engage in conversations with people who also may not be convinced, because that's the beginning of the reparation process. And I want to thank Jim.
Yeah, let's end with three things. One,
you got to get
Okay, good. I encourage you to go to NCOBRA's website. It's NCO NCOBRA, and look it up. They've got lots of information about strategy and all that. That's excellent. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about today, I've written blogs on. So if you go to my blog, Note to My White Self, there's a lot of stuff on there. If you want to read an extended thing about the Haiti Revolution, there's a lot of pieces there, and I just put them out there. When I learn something, I try to just share it with my peers. The other thing, if you're white, some people say, well, if you got to wait for legislation, it's never going to happen. I don't presently believe that, but You don't have to wait. And this is personal reparations suggestions for white people. And so these are a list of things that if you're white, you could begin doing right now that encourage you to be reparational. So I encourage you to look at that list as possibilities. So we've got one last brief.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Listen, thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ron Cole with the local NACP, branch 3353. I'm here today to speak to you briefly. I appreciate your patience. I want to first thank all of you for coming out, because I think anyone that came out today must care something about what's being discussed, or you wouldn't spend your time.
Yes.
So I'm not going to keep you long or belabor the point. I have a sheet here of some of our accomplishments. The NACP is one of the last civil rights organizations. We've been going for 110 years. In the crazy climate and all the things going on in the country right now, there is strength in numbers. We need to get on a vehicle or a path to bring about change. Some of the posters I had outside, some of the events from the 60s, some of the great things you guys have talked about here today, some of these things are only going to, in some instances, come about that we have to achieve more political participation and power. They don't pay any attention to black folks because, let's just face it, a lot of black folks don't vote. And let's face it, I want to tell you guys, in case you didn't know, you didn't turn black last night. So I keep being kind of alerted that people seem somewhat startled that certain people don't like you. But we must begin to participate, and NACP is one of those vehicles to participate. I want to give you a couple of our key accomplishments. We're doing so many things that are unbeknownst to the public. You know, for the longest time there was one voting location downtown at the city county building. There are now 6. Throughout the county, you can vote anywhere you wish, not even near your own home, and you can vote anytime once they start early electing. That came about from the NACP and Common Cause suing them. That was in place for all those years when it could have been spread out, because that's a form of voter suppression. So these are the things we're doing to try to make a difference. We now have in Indiana that all schools will have an ethnic study class. This goes back to some of what you're talking about, reparations and other things, and that is educating folks. So we now have that in the curriculum. The NACP was instrumental in getting the check, the block. They got the governor to sign the law to felons don't have to check the box, I'm a convicted felon, so that people have a job.
Paying the block.
The legislators fought that hardly, but we were able to get that done. So we're doing a lot of things. We have 15 different committees. We meet the first Thursday of each month. It's an exciting time. You wouldn't be here if you weren't socially aware, but we have to rise to the challenge. We currently have a petition going for the hate crime legislation. You're welcome to sign when you leave. We're going to turn them over to the governor. In the month of October, we're trying to get 100,000 signatures. Obviously, we hope to get more. You all can take this number, whether you become a member today or not. We have an action line, and it alerts you to some of the things going on nationally and politically. If you just text NAACP to the number 40649, you'll automatically be in our loop. And every time something occurs nationally, you'll get messages on, hey, we're doing this. Did you know this? Call your senator, call your congressman. Here's what they're doing today. And it's a furtherance of your conversation here today. The NACP did have a resolution at the National Convention in Detroit last month addressing reparations. I don't have the text of it here with me, but they are addressing it. I say this to say a major point, I won't keep it. The NACP, a nonpartisan organization, is one of the few organizations that still has doors open to it. They have access to folks that other folks don't, because they're nonpartisan. When we do voter registration, we put a lot of work into getting out the vote. In case you guys don't know, Indiana had, I think, the lowest in the country of voter turnout. Of all that, 720,000 people were removed from the polls last year. After Barack Obama ran in 2008, 720,000 people did not come back and vote for the next 8 years, 12 years. And that was because they voted for Obama. 80% of those people were in Marion County, the rest were in Lake County. They purged them. The Republicans took them all off the polls, so I guess they don't live in Indiana anymore. So that's 700,000 enough to make a difference in the election.
You mean Lake County didn't even vote?
Man, we got issues, and a lot of work went into that. But whether it's a reparations or what we're talking about, even though we know it's a skewed system, we've got to join the fight. The NACP is your opportunity. So I'm not just asking here the LD come and join the NACP for some nicety. I'm asking you to come and join the fight, be a freedom fighter. We are witnessing history. History is going to judge what we did in this period. So we are just a vehicle. We have 15 different committees. If you have a passion or interest, whether it be schools, health and child health and welfare, or whatever the case, we have committees working on that. We were instrumental in getting the criminal justice court downtown for veterans so they would not be sentenced as hardcore felons and give them an alternative opportunity in life. So we're doing social change. We're asking you to consider it's only $30 a year. It's not a lot. I call it paying back or paying it forward. But if you're fired up and you want to do some things, these are the people you want to get involved with. And so I'm humbled. I thank you for listening to me today. If you have an organization or a group that's doing some things, then we want to know who you are as well, because one of the things we're doing is networking with other groups. I'm working with Indivisible. I'm looped into the loop with MoveOn.org, the Democratic Party. I'd like to see more of you fired up about some things at some of the demonstrations. You know, an example, many of you know we have a immigration detention center out here on the west side. We did a demonstration out there a month ago. So we need more of you to come out for those kind of things. This is on 74th and Woodland. It's a serious place. People go in, they don't come out. That's here in America, in Indianapolis today. They've been watching the place for a year. People go in, they don't come out. So it's on 74th and Woodland up to Zionsville Road. You don't even know it's there until you look at it closely, and then you realize that is a crazy fence around.
Looks like a factory.
Yeah, so you wouldn't even know it. So,
Well, I'm not from here, so I don't have a clue what you're talking about.
if you're not from here, think about joining your local chapter or branch where you're at. I just simply say that we need to join the fight, whether it be this forum today or the NACP. I'm asking you to come and join the fight. There's strength in numbers. We need you. That's what we really do. So thank you. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you all coming out here.
Now, where are you located at?
Thank you for saying that, ma'am. We're at the Julia Carson Center here on Fall Creek. We meet the first Thursday of each month at 6:30. You don't have to be a member to come. If you just want to come and listen, you certainly are welcome to do so. First Thursday of each month at 6:30. We're a very diverse organization, so it's not black, it's not white. It's civil rights, human rights. Your rights are my rights, and vice versa. Okay? I do want to stress, though, not to get out of my lane. I think it's very important that we remain tolerant of one another, and even when someone doesn't agree or say.
I don't tolerate that while you're talking to me. I don't tolerate that.
No.
I don't tolerate that. And I don't even tolerate you apologizing. That looked like old Tom to me.
No.
Yeah, that's a colored folk.
No.
So if you want to talk to me, talk to me.
I'll talk to you.
Yeah, talk to me. Yeah, talk to me. Yeah, that's what you need to do.
Views, but I think
yeah, no doubt about it.
Ground. So I'm not talking to any one individual. I say
right.
Whether it be one of you, as you carry on this discussion further, I'm saying that each of us have to be prepared for that. I'm just as dysfunctional or angry as the next person. You know.
That's questionable.
I don't call that, Tom, but I tell you this, my character is not subjected to somebody else's opinion. You do not define me.
Yeah,
You know when you don't.
Nor you me.
And that's right.
Yeah, nor you me.
I don't know the man.
Yeah, you will.
That we should conduct ourselves accordingly. So listen, thank you very much. I do appreciate your time.
And I want
And you too, sir.
give some space
I don't appreciate you.
That's all right.
I'm good.
All right. Then you do have issues.
Now look.
into this space and offering us a fresh perspective on this. So if you will help me recognize Jim and for you for coming out today and learning a little bit.